I didn't hear my name in a good way. It was a Thursday night, open bar, rented rooftop. Those little LED candles that try to make a corporate party feel like a movie scene. People were laughing too loudly, like they'd been practicing for the cameras that weren't there. I remember thinking, for once, maybe I'd earned this. Maybe this was the night my life finally moved forward. Because I wasn't supposed to be there. Not really. I was invited 3 days earlier, after months of 12-hour days on the same project everyone suddenly cared about. The kind of project leadership only mentions when it's going well and pretends doesn't exist when it's messy. Our product had been bleeding clients. We were weeks away from losing the contract that basically kept our quarter from looking like a funeral. I built the reporting model that found the leak. I rewired the churn dashboard, fixed the broken pipeline, and sat with sales and support until we could finally tell a coherent story to the client. My manager called it great work. My director called it team effort. But late at night, when it was just me and a glowing spreadsheet and the same cold coffee, it was my name on every file. So when the invite hit my inbox, promotion party, recognition night, I stared at it like it might disappear. My manager, Connor, stopped by my desk and said, casual as anything, "You should come. It's good visibility." Visibility? That word should have warned me. I showed up in a suit that fit just a little too tight in the shoulders because I don't buy suits for parties. I buy them for funerals and weddings. I walked into the elevator with 2 VPs and tried not to look like I was waiting for someone to tell me I was in the wrong place. The rooftop was already crowded. Our CEO was there, surrounded by the same circle of people who always looked like they'd been born knowing where to stand. The execs had their drinks in hand, their laughs timed perfectly, their eyes always scanning. HR had set up a step and repeat with the company logo like we were celebrities for surviving another quarter. I found Connor near the bar. He clapped me on the shoulder. "There he is," he said like I was a buddy, like we'd ever grabbed a beer outside of Slack. "Drink?" I said no at first. I wanted my head clear. I'd promised myself, if my name gets called, I don't want to be buzzed. Then Connor leaned in and said, "Relax, tonight's good. You'll see." So I took a drink. It tasted like lime and cheap confidence. I tried to blend in, made small talk with people who didn't know what I did but knew I mattered this week. Heard the project mentioned in conversation like it had a life of its own. My director, Melissa, did that thing where she talked about our initiative while looking straight through me. I told myself it was fine. I told myself this was how it worked. You don't get credit first. You get access first. Credit comes later. Then the speeches started. A microphone squealed. People gathered around the small stage area, plates and drinks in hand, smiles fixed. Our CEO thanked everyone for resilience, whatever that means when your job is mostly anxiety in a blazer. Then he started listing names, people getting promotions, people moving teams, people being recognized. Each time a name hit the air, there was applause on cue. It was clean, rehearsed, like the room had done it 1,000 times. I stood a little behind Connor, close enough to hear, far enough to disappear if I needed to. My stomach felt tight, like I was waiting for a verdict. And when the CEO paused, looked down at his card, and said my name, it hit me like a flash of heat. For half a second I thought, this is it. And then the room went silent. Not polite listening, silent. Not waiting for the joke, silent. It was the kind of silence where you can hear the city traffic 20 floors below. The kind where someone coughs, and it sounds like a mistake. The kind where you realize you've walked into something everyone else knew about. The CEO didn't smile when he said my name. He didn't even look up. He just repeated it. Slower, like he was making sure the syllables landed. I saw Connor's face change before I felt my own. Connor didn't clap. He didn't even move. His eyes stayed forward, but his jaw locked so hard I could see the muscle in his cheek. And in that moment, standing there with a drink I didn't want and a suit I couldn't breathe in, I understood something I wish I'd understood months earlier. You don't invite someone to a room like this just to celebrate them. Sometimes you invite them so everyone can watch what happens next. I looked around, trying to find one friendly face, one person who looked surprised, confused, anything. No one did. People avoided my eyes like I was contagious. Melissa stared at her glass. HR's director shifted her weight like she'd been waiting for this part. Even the bartender stopped moving for a second like the air itself had changed. The CEO cleared his throat and finally looked up. He scanned the crowd once, slow, controlled, like he wanted to make sure everyone was paying attention. Then he said, "We also need to talk about standards." And my name was still hanging in the air when he said it. The CEO didn't accuse me directly. That was the first thing that made it worse. He talked about process violations, about trust, about how even high performers could become liabilities if they didn't respect internal boundaries. Every sentence was vague enough to sound responsible, but specific enough that everyone knew who it was about. Me, standing 10 feet away, holding a drink I hadn't touched since my name landed wrong in the room. "And," he said, glancing down at his card again, "we take anonymous reports very seriously." That word, anonymous, did something to the air. People shifted. Someone behind me whispered something and then stopped. I felt heat crawl up my neck, but I didn't move. I'd learned a long time ago that the fastest way to lose power in a room is to show surprise. The CEO continued carefully. "We're reviewing a situation involving data access and internal communications. Out of respect for the process, we won't be making any announcements related to that individual tonight." He didn't say my name again. He didn't have to. The silence returned, heavier this time. Not shock now, relief. The kind people feel when it's not them. Then, like a switch flipping, the applause started. Polite, controlled. Applause for standards, for integrity, for moving on. Connor leaned toward me and whispered, "Don't react. We'll talk tomorrow." Tomorrow, the most dangerous word in corporate language. I nodded once, set my glass down on the nearest table, and walked toward the elevator. No one stopped me. No one asked if I was okay. 2 people actually stepped aside to give me space, like I was already radioactive. In the elevator, my reflection looked calm. Too calm. I remember thinking, if I look upset, they win twice. When I got home, I didn't sleep. I replayed every interaction from the last 6 months like security footage. Every late-night Slack, every shared file, every time someone asked me for a quick export or temporary access. By 3:17 a.m., one name kept resurfacing. Evan. Evan was my peer on paper, but not in reality. Same title, different function. He was loud where I was quiet, charming where I was precise. He had a habit of taking credit sideways, never outright stealing, just repositioning himself so outcomes drifted toward him naturally. Leadership loved him because he spoke their language, confidence without detail. 3 weeks earlier, Evan had slacked me late, said he needed read-only access to my dashboard to prep leadership materials. I remembered hesitating. I remembered granting it anyway, because saying no in our culture was treated like an attitude problem. The next morning, he'd thanked me in a public channel. "Huge help," he wrote, emojis included. I pulled up my laptop and started checking timestamps, access logs, version history. Nothing illegal, nothing obvious. But there it was, a pattern. Screenshots exported at odd hours, messages forwarded then deleted, context removed. I realized then that this wasn't about data misuse. It was about narrative. By Monday morning, the tone had changed. My calendar was empty in a way that felt intentional. Meetings I usually attended had been rescheduled. People replied slower, shorter. HR emailed me asking to connect briefly later that week. No mention of suspension, no formal accusation, just fog. At noon, Connor finally called me into a conference room. He looked tired, not worried for me, worried for himself. "Off the record," he said, closing the door, "there was a complaint. Screenshots. Leadership thinks you might have shared sensitive material externally." "Externally?" I repeated. He nodded, but didn't meet my eyes. That's the concern. I felt irritation burn through the calm I'd been holding on to. Connor, everything I touched was internal. Logged. Approved. I know, he said quickly. I told them that. But optics... There it was again. Optics. The cousin of truth that always wins in boardrooms. Who filed it? I asked. He exhaled. Anonymous. Of course. But, he added, lowering his voice, Evan's name came up, not as the source, just around it. That was the moment something shifted. Not rage, not fear, clarity. They weren't investigating to find the truth. They were investigating to contain risk, and I was the cleanest variable to isolate. Quiet, replaceable, convenient. I thanked Connor for his honesty. I meant it. Then I went back to my desk and did something I should have done earlier. I stopped trying to defend myself emotionally and started documenting everything. That afternoon, HR sent a formal request for a written statement, not an interrogation, a paper trail. I wrote carefully, factual, calm, no accusations, just timelines, permissions, references to policy. And then I did one more thing. I requested, in writing, a formal review of all access logs related to my accounts, for clarity and cooperation. It was a reasonable request, impossible to refuse without raising questions. I didn't know it yet, but that email changed the direction of everything. Because once you ask for logs, you're no longer arguing opinions. You're arguing math, and math doesn't care who's charming. By the time HR replied, I already knew how this was going to end. Not the outcome, but the shape of it. They agreed to my request, of course. Politely, professionally. We appreciate your cooperation. Transparency is important to us. The email read like it had been passed through 3 legal filters before it reached me. What it didn't say mattered more than what it did. No timeline, no scope, no promise of closure. That's when it finally clicked. This wasn't an investigation meant to clear my name. It was a holding pattern. As long as things stayed under review, leadership didn't have to promote me, didn't have to fire me, didn't have to explain anything to anyone. I existed in a gray zone where decisions could be postponed indefinitely. I was a risk they could keep quiet. That night, sitting alone at my kitchen table, I stopped asking myself how to prove I was right and started asking a better question. What happens if they decide I'm not worth the effort? I opened a blank document and began rebuilding the last 6 months. Not emotionally, but structurally. Who had access to what? When permissions changed? Who requested what and why? I didn't assume malice yet. I just followed behavior. Patterns emerged quickly once I stopped hoping for innocence. Evan's requests always came late. Never during meetings. Never in writing that referenced policy. Always framed as urgency. Can you help me out real quick? Need this before leadership sync. And every time he positioned himself between me and decision makers. He presented summaries. He translated technical findings. I'd thought he was collaborating. He was curating. The next morning, HR scheduled a formal interview. 2 people on the call, 1 taking notes. The other watching my reactions like that was part of the evidence. They asked about my role, my access, my communication habits. Nothing aggressive, nothing accusatory. Then came the question that mattered. Were you aware that materials from your dashboard may have been shared outside the approved group? I paused, not for drama, but because I wanted my answer to be exact. No, I said, but I'm aware who had access. Silence. The note-taker stopped typing. I didn't accuse Evan. Not yet. I just stated facts. Dates. Permissions. Public Slack messages where he thanked me for access. I referenced company policy, not defensively, but fluently. HR asked if I had evidence. I told them I had documentation. That word changed the temperature. After the call, something unexpected happened. People started messaging me again, quietly, carefully. A former teammate asked if I was okay. Someone from finance pinged me about an unrelated thing, and then warned me, indirectly, that leadership was nervous. Nervous people make mistakes. 2 days later, I got looped into an email I shouldn't have seen. Evan had replied, all to a thread about the ongoing situation, assuming I was excluded. I wasn't. In it, he framed the narrative perfectly. Concerned, disappointed. He talked about discovering inconsistencies and raising the issue responsibly. He never lied outright. He just arranged the truth so it pointed away from him. That was the moment the last illusion broke. I wasn't fighting a misunderstanding. I was inside a strategy. That night, I didn't sleep, but not because I was anxious, because I was planning. I booked a consultation with an employment lawyer, not to threaten, to understand leverage. We spoke for 30 minutes. He didn't dramatize anything. He just confirmed what I already suspected. Companies don't fear being wrong. They fear being provable. You don't need a confrontation, he told me. You need a process they can't control. The next day, I sent another email to HR. I requested a formal cross-departmental audit of access logs, not just for my account, but for all derivative exports tied to the project. I cited compliance language. I cited precedent. I copied legal. It was calm, professional, impossible to dismiss. Within an hour, my director called me for the first time since the party. She didn't mention the audit. She asked how I was holding up. She said leadership valued my contributions. She hinted that things could be worked out if everyone stayed reasonable. I listened. I thanked her. And I said no to the part she didn't say out loud, because by then I understood something that changed everything. They thought I was trying to survive this. They didn't realize I'd already stopped playing defense. And once you do that, once you stop hoping to be saved and start preparing to be right, the balance shifts. Quietly, irreversibly. That week the logs came back, and for the first time since my name went silent in that room, I smiled. The logs didn't scream. They whispered. Which was worse? It started with a spreadsheet, rows of timestamps, user IDs, access types. Boring. Clean. The kind of document executives skim and analysts live in. I exported nothing. Modified nothing I shouldn't have. Exactly as I'd said. But when I followed the trail outward, derivative exports, forwarded attachments, temporary links, Evan's name kept reappearing. Not loud, not frequent, just consistent. Always after hours. Always adjacent to leadership meetings. Always followed by a message where he summarized findings, so no one needed to open the raw data themselves. He wasn't stealing files. He was laundering context, and there was more. Expense approvals tied to a pilot initiative leadership had been pushing hard. Vendor decks Evan had circulated with numbers that matched my early drafts, but not my final conclusions. He'd frozen my work in time, then used it to justify decisions I'd later warned against. That was the fraud. Quiet, plausible, denied by design. I forwarded the annotated logs to HR and legal together. No commentary, just a single line. Please review attached against prior representations. Within 30 minutes, my calendar exploded. A meeting added, then another, then one marked urgent. My director called again. Voice tight now, no warmth left to perform. She asked where I'd gotten the logs. I told her the truth. She asked why I'd involved legal. I told her the truth again. She didn't thank me this time. By the next morning, Vane was out sick. Leadership circulated a vague note about ongoing reviews. HR asked me not to discuss the matter internally. I agreed, because by then everyone already was. The office didn't feel loud. It felt pressurized. People spoke in half sentences. Slack messages ended abruptly. Someone canceled a recurring meeting with no explanation. That afternoon, Legal scheduled a call. They didn't apologize. They never do. They asked clarifying questions. Narrow ones. Questions you only ask when you already know the answer and want to document it cleanly. Then they asked me something unexpected. If we confirm these findings, the lawyer said carefully, What outcome are you seeking? I paused, not because I didn't know, but because I wanted to be precise. I want the record corrected, I said, and I want to exit cleanly. Silence. Not shock this time. Calculation. 2 days later, Evan's badge stopped working. No announcement, no goodbye email. His calendar vanished. Someone from IT collected his laptop quietly, like they were removing a broken appliance. By Friday, my director was taking personal leave. The pilot initiative was paused indefinitely. The chaos never went public. That's how corporations punish. They don't burn people at the stake. They erase them. HR finally sat me down for a resolution discussion. They framed it as appreciation, growth, mutual respect. They acknowledged missteps in process. They offered me the promotion, a title bump, a retention bonus, an apology that never used the word sorry. I listened, calm, present. Then I declined. The room changed again, smaller, colder. I slid a printed document across the table. A settlement proposal my lawyer had helped to draft. Conservative. Clean. NDA included. References guaranteed. No admission of wrongdoing from either side. HR asked if I was sure. I was, because the thing they didn't understand was this. Winning inside a place that tried to break you still keeps you inside it. I signed the agreement the following week. My last day was quiet. Connor shook my hand and avoided my eyes. Someone from my old team messaged me, "Good luck," and then deleted it. My access shut off at noon. As I left the building for the final time, the lobby looked exactly the same. But I wasn't, and somewhere upstairs, behind closed doors and careful language, the people who thought they'd controlled the story were still explaining how it happened. On paper, where excuses don't last. I didn't feel victorious when it was over. I felt quiet. The kind of quiet that comes after something heavy finally gets set down. No applause, no dramatic final email, just a clean inbox, a signed agreement, and a calendar that suddenly belonged to me again. On my last day, I packed my desk in 10 minutes. I hadn't decorated it much. Another thing that made me easy to overlook while I was there. A notebook, a charger, a framed photo I'd forgotten I even kept at work. When I disabled my badge, the light blinked red once, then stayed off. That was it. No ceremony. No one walked me out. In the elevator down, I caught my reflection again. Same suit, different posture. I wasn't bracing for anything anymore. 2 weeks later, the recruiter who'd been circling me quietly for months finally called back. The role was better. Smaller company, clearer reporting lines, written boundaries around access and ownership. During the final interview, the VP asked why I was leaving my current role. I told the truth, carefully. I'm looking for a place where accountability runs both ways. He nodded like that answer cost something to say. I accepted the offer the same day. From the outside, the fallout at my old company looked like nothing. No headlines, no LinkedIn confessions, just small, telling shifts. The pilot initiative never restarted. The quarterly deck quietly removed a slide Evan used to own. My director never returned from leave. People stopped using certain phrases like they'd learned which words left fingerprints. A former teammate messaged me months later. Said things felt different now, tighter, more cautious. He didn't say my name, but I knew what he meant. That was the karma. Not revenge, not humiliation. Consequences. The kind that arrive without drama and stay without needing to be explained. Sometimes I think back to that rooftop, to the moment my name hit the air and the room decided all at once to go silent. For a long time, I thought that silence meant I'd lost. I see it differently now. Silence is what happens right before control changes hands. They thought I was there to be evaluated. They didn't realize I was listening. And once you hear how a system really works, you don't raise your voice. You step out of the room.